Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome, I'm Bettina Lawton, your host of Inside Scoop Virginia. And tonight we are going to talk about what is a new concept. It's called social entrepreneurship. And we have with us Greg Werkheiser. Greg Werkheiser is the managing director of something called the Mason Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And that, as its title indicates, is actually housed over at George Mason University, the largest university in Virginia, I believe, with about 33,000 students. And they have really come to the forefront and taken on this idea of social entrepreneurship. So we're going to find out what that is. So let me tell you why you should believe anything that Greg has to say tonight by telling you a little bit about who Greg is. He has formed and led social enterprises in the field of social innovation, civic education, law, government, and politics, and cultural heritage preservation. In the field of social innovation, he founded and directed for 6 years a project called the Phoenix Project, and I'm familiar with some of the work that Greg did there, some wonderful work he did. And for his efforts, the Phoenix Project received in 2009 the Virginia Governor's Volunteerism and Community Service Award. He also, even before that, when he was quite a young man, created and led for 7 years the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership, and it is now housed at the University of Virginia. And its success, because everything Greg does leads to success in this area, was documented by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in a book called Educating for Democracy, Preparing Undergraduates for Responsible Political Engagement. Now, Greg has a lawyer degree, a Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law, and he has a bachelor's degree in government from the College of William and Mary, where he was the student government president and the chair of a statewide student coalition. So you can see his involvement in all of this sort of community building, coalition building, started way back when he was in college. So I'm very pleased, Greg, that you're able to join us tonight.
Thank you, Bettina. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Phoenix Project, because as I understand it, that sort of has led into the Mason Center for Social Entrepreneurship. So what was that? You started it, and I know you did a whole bunch of stuff down in the Petersburg area of Virginia, but what was that? Why did you get involved with that?
Sure. Well, the Phoenix Project was an organization to promote this concept of social entrepreneurship and to do it in Virginia, and in particular to test out the theories of social enterprise in some of Virginia's most economically distressed communities. So Petersburg was one of the communities. We worked also in southeast Newport News, and then began to work along the Route 1 corridor here in Northern Virginia, which eventually led to a conversation with George Mason University. Which is over the past 2 years, where we've essentially merged the Phoenix Project to create this new Center for Social Entrepreneurship at Mason. But the Phoenix Project was really about this concept of helping communities that are struggling find ways to do social impact business in a more sustainable and scalable way. And that's a fancy way of simply saying— I was
going to say, what is that exactly?
It's a fancy way of saying, look, folks throughout Virginia, indeed throughout the country, are dealing with issues of access to education, poverty, the ability to put a meal on the table at the end of the day, to get a job. And we've tried to tackle those challenges as a society over the years in sometimes successful and many times unsuccessful ways. And what we wanted to do through the Phoenix Project, what we continue to do through the Center for Social Entrepreneurship, is say there are ways to tackle social challenges with more successful business plans. And at the end of the day, that's the concept of social enterprise. The social piece is tackling our biggest challenges as a society, and the enterprise piece is figuring out ways to make those more impactful and financially sustainable in an age of limited resources.
Well, limited resources is absolutely the key, because what you keep reading about, and those who watch the show regularly, we've had a bunch of shows on the Fairfax budget, the Virginia budget, and how a lot of nonprofits and private entities that provide really public good kind of work, whether it's with the mentally challenged or the other disadvantaged folks, and now there's no money.
Right.
In either the private sector, and certainly not in the government willing to spend money on that. So this sounds like a timely kind of development that you're doing over there.
Well, the lack of resources from traditional sources like government, that used to be cyclical. It would come and go. Now it's more permanent. And that's just a reflection of the fact that our needs have grown. We went through a significant economic crisis that from which we're just beginning to emerge. And folks need to be creative about diversifying the way in which they sustain their organizations. That's particularly true in the nonprofit sector. So what we've seen over time is nonprofits start to think about merger in a way that used to only be familiar in the private sector. We start seeing nonprofits that are thinking about what we call earned income, where instead of counting on a check to sustain them from Fairfax County or the federal government, they're starting to launch their own business enterprises, a portion of the revenue of which goes to support the social mission. So in many ways, the age of austerity is forcing all sectors, but especially the nonprofit sector, to be more creative. And the results might not be as terrible as everyone says they're going to be. It has a way of kind of forcing efficiency into the sector that, that might be good for the sector long term.
Well, let me back up just a little bit on this earned income, generating income, because I think the classic view of a nonprofit was that you got donations and you got government grants, where you got big foundations. You know, the Kaiser Foundation would give you money for whatever it was, as opposed to actually having to go out with some kind of a product, and now they're moving into like product and services that they're selling? Is that the idea?
What we're seeing is the breakdown of the traditional divisions in this country between the public, the private, and the nonprofit sector. It's no longer the case that we can look out with a straight face and say these challenges that we face as a society they go in box A, box B, or box C. It used to be that the private sector was in charge of the market, and what the market didn't solve would be kicked over to the government, and the government would provide a baseline of support above or below which we didn't want any citizen to fall. And then the gap in those two would be picked up at the last minute by the nonprofit sector. And what we see is that initially, gradually, and now rapidly, that's breaking down. And it's breaking down not just kind of in public-private partnerships, but in the very way in which we construct businesses. So for instance, Virginia is one of several states that have passed legislation acknowledging a new type of corporate form called a B corporation. The B stands for benefit. So now you can form your company no longer necessarily as a 501c3, which used to be the traditional nonprofit, or as a traditional LLC, which was the business side. But you can form a company that is recognized by the government as having two bottom lines. One is social benefit, and one is for profit. Pretty exciting.
I've never heard of that. That's absolutely fascinating. How do you do a bottom line for social benefit if you have stockholders who, you know, that's all you ever hear is that traditional businesses are now totally short-term driven, quarterly profits. If you don't meet whatever your earning projection is, then your shareholders are going to sell, your stock's going to tank, you're going to be out of a job if you're the CEO. How do you do that in this B corporation if you've got this separate thing that's a social benefit? How do they quantify that?
Well, I'll make it even more complicated for you. They talk about in the field of social entrepreneurship, they talk about a triple bottom line, right? Or the 3 Ps, if you will. One is people, one is profits, and one is planet. And what's gotten a lot of attention over recent years is the mix between the profits and the planet. So we're very familiar with the green movement.
Right.
And the concept that you had to, if you wanted to save the earth, you had to kind of live in your mother's basement and live on ramen noodles.
Oh,
your carbon footprint, right.
Exactly.
Now you've got folks who are making light bulbs, they're making cars, they're making all kinds of products that simultaneously have a lower impact on the environment, or in some cases a positive impact on the environment, and those folks are making money, lots of money in the traditional sense. So the technicalities as to whether the stockholders' interests in getting paid are in direct conflict with how you measure the impact on the planet or on people, that's gradually being resolved. And stockholders are investing increasingly in companies where it satisfies both their pocketbook and, if you will, their soul. So they can go to bed at night saying, you know what, I made some money. This organization and this business competes in the regular marketplace, but it takes into consideration as its measure of success whether or not long-term it's a positive thing for the world or not.
So it's a touchy-feely side, and then the hardcore traditional dollar side.
Yes, and the way that that shows up in the work of our center, we deal with folks all along life's spectrum in terms of their interest in this field. So we have folks who have been entrepreneurs who have made millions of dollars out in the world in the Northern Virginia tech community, who are saying, you know what, I've done that career, let me figure out how to do something that's also positive for society. But our specialty, if you will, is we focus on emerging entrepreneurs. And you can take some water. I won't tell anybody. It's live. Take some water. So we focus on emerging entrepreneurs. So frequently that's young people who are coming out of college who are wondering whether or not they can balance the ability to make a living with also doing some good in the world.
All right, so.
And I can keep talking to buy us some more time.
Yes,
Everyone's paying
exactly.
attention.
Yes, everyone's paying attention to you out there. Okay, so the center started in 2011, right?
Yes, it officially started in 2011. And because it was in and of itself kind of an experiment, it was a merger between existing activities that were going on in this field at George Mason University and the work of the Phoenix Project. So over time, over the past 18 months, we've kind of pulled that together, and the center is off and running.
And is this a bachelor's degree program, or is this not a degree program?
We have, it's a center in the traditional sense. So we have educational programs, including a new master's degree program that I'd love to talk about.
Interesting. Well, let's do that, because I can hear the music now.
Sure.
Now, hopefully I've got enough voice back to do this and take us out to our break. We will come back with Frank Werkheiser. Stay with us.
This year, 28,000 Americans will be diagnosed with oral cancer. Every year, 7,000 Americans die of oral cancer.
I'm Eva Cohen, and I'm an oral cancer survivor. I didn't fit the profile. I didn't smoke or drink. I had no family history of cancer, no family history of cancer. I was 31 years old, 31 years old. I went to see my dentist about a sore in my mouth that wouldn't heal. It was oral cancer. I had to have a radical neck dissection and a portion of my tongue reconstructed. I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
I'm Surgeon General Richard Carmona. The survival rate for oral cancer is only 50%. Oral cancer can happen to anyone. If you have a sore or lesion in your mouth that doesn't heal within 2 weeks, see your dentist. Early detection is the key.
Early detection saves lives. I know.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
2 words for you. Pop quiz. Ready? Name any funny movie. A drama. Name a mystery. And one more thing. Name the movie your kids saw today in science class.
Know what really matters. Know about your kid's school and know about your kid. Find out 100 ways to know more, do more.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton. This is Inside Scoop, Virginia. I'm getting my voice back slowly. With us, we have Greg Werkheiser. He is the director of the Mason Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And when we went to break, we were talking about how the center operated. Was it a degree program or not? And Greg tells us that they have a master's degree. So I want to find out more about that.
Sure. We've got educational programs, research programs, leadership training programs, so the full gamut. Programs that both serve the George Mason audience in terms of students and faculty, but also increasingly initiatives that reach out globally. So one of those programs is a new master's degree in interdisciplinary studies with a focus on social entrepreneurship. Could the names get longer?
No.
No.
And interdisciplinary studies are always sort of like, does that mean you couldn't decide on a major? That's what I always think of when I hear that, actually.
So Mason came up with this, or Mason has this interdisciplinary studies major available so that as new fields emerge, it can respond relatively rapidly. Okay. And this is one of only 8 graduate degrees in the world focused on social entrepreneurship. So it kicks off this fall. Students both within Mason and around the world can enroll. And it's one of about 12 initiatives that the center is pursuing right now.
Now, when you say students from around the world can enroll, so they don't have to physically be present on the Mason campus to do this?
Well, it's a good question. For the master's degree program, eventually they'll need to be physically present. But we're trying some new things. As you may have heard, there's a rapid movement within the field of distance education. Right. And even more recently, there are these concepts of massive open online courses. Came out of Stanford. There was a faculty member there that partnered with a professor of computer science at UVA, and they offered a traditional course online, and 160,000 people signed up.
Wow.
Yeah. So since then, there's been a movement towards trying to bridge the gap between traditional education that requires you to be in person and online offerings. And we're going to launch in the next couple of weeks several new initiatives that are at that intersection, and they'll be focused on social entrepreneurship. So the long answer to your question is that in a couple of weeks, someone in Africa, Asia, can sit at their computer and take advantage of some smart folks talking about social entrepreneurship coming out of George Mason University, and never have to come in.
At all. So it wouldn't be the kind of thing where during the regular year, during, you know, if you're working and trying to do this part-time, you don't have to show up for 6 or 8 weeks at some point. Because I've heard of those kinds of programs, but eventually they required you to be on campus for a substantial period of time.
We're in pursuit of the whole range. So there are programs where you can show up for 2 years, like the Masters. There are programs where you can take some distance and some in person, like distance education courses. And then what I was just referring to, these massive open online courses, can, at your discretion, not show up. But the question is whether or not you get credit for them over time. Right. It's a rapidly emerging field.
Okay, so it started about 1.5 years ago. So this is sort of your second fall in any event, right?
Yep.
So how many students have actually gone through any part of the social entrepreneurship programs? Courses?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd say we've touched hundreds of students. Now remember that we brought over from the Phoenix Project to Mason programs that have been going on for 7 years. Okay. So I'll give you an example of one. Yeah. We have a program called the Social Innovation Program. And every year we bring 25 students now from around the world. They come to Mason's campus for 6 weeks. And in the first 12 days, we bring in 35 guest lecturers on a curriculum around social enterprise. And so it might be folks like Mark Warner might come in and talk about how the Congress is supporting innovation with its legislation. We might have someone come in and talk about how you need to learn how to master a budget if you want to take what's in your heart as an idealist and put it into practice and have it be sustained. We have folks coming in talking about how you scale up ideas from something that works in your backyard to something that can work in backyards around the country. So that's the academic portion. And then we follow that up with an experiential portion where those students get partnered with community nonprofits and municipal agencies to do projects for those organizations. And over the years, we've done 250 projects.
Wow, like what? I mean, is it just teaching them how to fundraise or how to write a budget, or?
It's usually usually a little bit more complex. So it might be an organization that says, you know what, we've been relying on a check from Fairfax County to keep the lights on for a number of years. And we do a better job at what we're doing than the government would do if it did it itself, but we know that we've got to come up with a better business plan. So we'll put a team of students together, we'll hire clinical faculty to make sure that the product that they do for the community is up to our standards. And then within that 6-week period, they'll turn around a business plan for some aspect of that organization's efforts that'll say, here's how within 2 years you begin to lessen your reliance on your traditional funding stream and build a little bit of independence that'll keep you floating when the economy goes up and down as it's likely to do.
Well, you must have an amazing demand from businesses, because that seems to be what everybody's problem is these days. So how does a business actually get onto that list in this program to participate?
Once a year, we send out a solicitation for this particular program, and we say we're looking for, you can be a public, private, or a nonprofit organization, but what we're looking for is a project that aims at sustainability, but also has a positive impact on the community. And it can be any spectrum. So we've worked for organizations that use soccer to help keep kids who are in economically distressed communities out of trouble. We've worked for the Park Service when they were implementing a new civic engagement program. So it's a full spectrum. This year, I think we had 65 requests for the 18 projects that we could do. So demand always outpaces the supply. But thankfully, now that we're at Mason, we can look to the whole of the university and find assets and be a matchmaker between the assets of Mason and the community partners that need help. So
the interdisciplinary part of the center, you could go, when you say reach across Mason for assets, if someone needs that kind of, how do we become less dependent on a particular revenue source, are there people like in the business department or marketing departments who you can say would come and participate in these kinds of projects?
Yes.
Or, and how does somebody who goes to Mason, so I go to Mason and I want to be a business major, kind of thing, are the social entrepreneurship kinds of courses considered electives for me, or do I have to say, no, my major is going to be in social entrepreneurship, or I've got a mind? I mean, how does that actually work for someone who's a student who wants to participate in this? Sure.
Well, the great thing about Mason is that they're very scrappy and entrepreneurial themselves. And so they've set up a number of ways in which a student can craft their own educational experience to respond to particular pieces of this. So if you're a student that's interested in being impactful in the environment long term, then we might recommend that you take some business courses, but you also concentrate in the substantive area around environmental concerns. There are programs and areas of study that can be pieced together that are responsive. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Okay. I'm just used to a more, and this is probably revealing my age, but I'm used to more of a linear kind of thing. You go into the business school, and in your freshman year, you've got these core courses that everybody's got to do, and then you do you know, accounting 1, accounting 2, cost accounting, tax accounting, auditing, as opposed to sort of saying, hey, I'd like to move over and do something on budgeting, on social entrepreneur.
Well, the university itself still has schools, and the divisions matter, and the number of required courses that you take matters. But they're also incredibly flexible in recognizing that students are increasingly putting themselves in their own driver's seat with respect to their educational destiny, and putting them in particular boxes while the rest of the world is evolving quickly is not necessarily the best business model. And so they've built some flexibility into the system. And what I would say by virtue of our center is that there's maybe 16 or 17 other university-based centers for social entrepreneurship around the country. Stanford, Harvard, American, Maryland. Ours is one of only 2 that is really university-wide. The rest of them are in business schools, because this field evolved in many ways out of the business schools, where business school majors would come in and say, you know what you're teaching me is great to make a profit, but I want something else in my life. And so corporate social responsibility and all these other trends emerged from the business school. But what Mason decided to do was it said, look, the problems that we're facing as a society require expertise across the full spectrum of knowledge. So let's create in the center an access point for the deans, the faculty, the students, the alumni, and the community members across every branch of the university. So while administratively we're associated with the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, which is the largest college at the university. We've got an advisory board that includes deans or the designees from across the school, which makes it wonderful. I mean, we feel like we've got access in designing these programs to the full resources of a 30,000 person university.
Excellent. And so while you put out these bids to, or not bids, I guess people make proposals, businesses say, hey, I need help on X, Y, or Z. Is there then at the same time a similar proposal that goes out across the university saying, who wants to play in this area for the next group that comes in, so people can elect in order to participate as they move through whatever else they're doing at Mason?
At the end of the day, our center is a matchmaker in many respects. We look out in the world and we say, who's trying to solve an old problem in a new way, in a way that is financially sustainable, that is scalable beyond the immediate circumstances, and for which the impacts on society are measurable, right? Who's obsessed with measuring their impact? And if we find those partners, our job is to look internally at the university and frankly beyond the university to other contacts we have and say, how can we bring these folks together?
Now, do you ever start with the problem and just sort of say, you know, you're sitting around, you're talking with your advisory thing, and you say, this is a problem, and then take it from there as opposed to somebody externally coming in and saying, here's my problem? All right, well, we're going to have to do that when we come back, because I just heard the music, but that would be sort of a fascinating ability to sort of sit around and say, I think this is a problem, let's see how to do that.
Let's talk about
that. That would be
after
wonderful.
The break.
We are going to come back with Greg Werkheiser and talk some more about the Mason Center for Social Entrepreneurship. Stay with us.
Some dreams are universal. Dreams that inspire us. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease that changes lives forever. The National MS Society does more for people with MS than any organization in the world. But we can't do it alone. To get involved, visit us online at nationalmssociety.org. or call 1-800-FIGHT-MS. This is why we're here. Because nobody dreams of having multiple sclerosis.
What's wrong with this picture? Half of young Americans can't locate economic powers like Japan and India. 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. Without geography, our children aren't ready for the world. Geography is everywhere. It's incredible creatures, rhythm, fashion, flavor. It's economics and politics. It's change. Understanding connections between people and places is critical in the 21st century. That's why we created mywonderfulworld.org. Go there now for your free parent and teacher action kits and give our kids the power of global knowledge. Because kids who understand our world today can succeed in it tomorrow.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and with us tonight is Greg Werkheiser. Greg is the director of the Center for Social Entrepreneurship. Almost said social responsibility because I keep talking about it so much. Over at George Mason University. And before the break, we were talking about whether, you know, Greg's got this advisory council, and can they sit around and say, here's a social problem that we think needs to have some help on it, and start from the problem versus someone coming to you all to say, here's something I've identified.
Sure. We've done that for a number of years. We've subsequently broadened the focus to be concerned about a lot of problems, but we first got into this largely because of the issues surrounding poverty. How do you break the cycle, both in Virginia communities and now more broadly, of really devastating economic situations? And I'll give you just the one example that we mentioned earlier. We've worked longest in Petersburg, which is just south of Richmond, our capital here in our fair Commonwealth. And Petersburg is a city of wonderful people. It's got significant history. It's probably got more unrevitalized historic homes than any other place in the country. And it tells a great story from the Revolution up through the Civil War, up to the American Civil Rights Movement. But the community's been devastated by the loss of some major industries over time. And as a consequence, as we were talking about before the show, when we first started working there, of the 9 public schools in Petersburg, none of them were accredited by the state. So you could go to the public high school and get a 4.0 and not get a diploma, which significantly inhibits your ability to be successful in moving on to higher education. They now have 4 or 5 of the public schools accredited, and so that's still 50%. Right. And communities like that abound throughout this country, and those circumstances are getting worse. So our first interest in this field was really a kind of on-the-street, practical, non-wonky, non-theoretical look. I mean, we can, the theory of social entrepreneurship can make people's eyes roll back in their head, but at the end of the day, it's trying to figure out a more effective way to solve very old problems. And as a society, we have been dealing with lack of access to education and hunger and violence for 2,000 years, if not more.
Well, what did you do in Petersburg to go from no high school being accredited to half of them at least getting accredited? I mean, it may not be 100% like in Fairfax County, but that's a pretty big jump. How did you actually do that when you're talking?
Well, first I'd say I would not take full or really even large credit for the turnaround in the public schools. There's some great change agents that came in. What we did is we went in and said, we want to be an honest broker between a community that does not have a lot of resources and the higher education system in Virginia that, despite the lack of sustained public investment in higher ed over the past 20 years, really has amazing assets in terms of its students, its faculty, and its administrators and its alumni. And those university community partnerships can sometimes be very imbalanced relationships.
Oh, yeah. So
that the community feels like it's a petri dish. So our job was to translate them to one another, where the community said, look, we want to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, but we recognize that there's expertise that we could really use in specific economic development areas. And the university said, we realize that teaching students in the classroom alone is not the full education that future leaders need. So we brought them together in the middle. We introduced to them this concept of social enterprise, where we have to focus on sustainable business plans. and we played matchmaker, and we did some 200 plus matches on everything from amelioration of blight to helping design new aspects of the public school system, to dealing with drug abuse and a series of other problems. And these challenges, of course, are not just local to Petersburg. It's where we started first, but then that process of being a bridge builder is something that we replicated elsewhere, and certainly brought it back up to my home here in Northern Virginia.
And now the goal, as you say, is to take this global through the center.
Yes, so after 6 years of kind of innovating as an independent organization through the Phoenix Project, what we saw in George Mason University was a daring, scrappy university that's willing to take risks. And the demand for this social entrepreneurship movement is really global. I mean, I'll offer you a couple of examples to kind of make this real for folks. People might be familiar with Tom's Shoes, which is a company where the business model is, if you buy one pair of our neat-looking shoes, we will automatically give another pair to someone who doesn't have one in a part of the world. And the way business used to be done was, we'd sell a bunch of shoes, and when we made profits at the end of the year, we would decide to give to charity. Now, the very formation of that business and its business model was premised on this one-for-one concept. And Tom's Shoes is incredibly popular. They're making millions of dollars, and they're giving away hundreds of thousands of pairs of shoes, right? That's a social enterprise. Wow. Because it's being held accountable both for its profits to its shareholders and to the number of folks it gives shoes. Couple, if I could,
one or two other examples. I'm absolutely fascinated by this notion that for every pair of shoes they sell, they're going to give a pair of shoes to somebody. It's like, how do you make any money doing that? But obviously they're doing it.
Well, they build it into their business model. Let me bring it even home more locally. We have a problem in Virginia, like we have everywhere else, with recidivism. So someone goes to prison, they get out, and the rates of recommitting crimes are relatively high. So there was an organization in Northern Virginia that was focused on that in the traditional way. They would meet with the prisoners, they would try and get them jobs, they would do counseling, and they showed the same moderate results that every other program shows. But a couple of years ago, they decided, you know, let's do something different. They opened a flower shop, right? And they employed folks who were ex-cons, but the profits from the flower shop, and it looked like any other flower shop. You'd walk in, we ordered flowers for our conferences, you'd pay the same amount, but the profits, instead of going back to shareholders, went back in to help fund these recidivism programs. And in the end, they demonstrated a greater ability to stand on their own for the bottom line. The prisoners were doing a better job, the recidivism rates came down, and long term, it doesn't rely on tax dollars, which is why, interestingly enough, this concept has kind of, or should have, universal nonpartisan appeal. Folks who want to solve social challenges and are driven by their heart get something out of this because it's a new way of answering old challenges. Folks who want the market to dictate can look at this and say, these folks have a business plan and they're lessening their reliance on taxpayer dollars, and so it's a win-win for everyone.
Well, there must be an enormous amount of creativity involved, because frankly, I would not have put ex-cons and flower shop together.
Right,
that is not one of those natural associations. Ex-con, construction, ex-con. Flowers, not so much.
There are efforts in Richmond, Virginia, where folks who have been homeless and are getting their first job are given an opportunity to do catering. When you hire that catering company and they come in, the food tastes just as good, the service is just as professional, but it's tied to a traditional business model. They're competing in the private market, but they're being held accountable to a bottom line that's different than just how much money comes in.
Very interesting concepts. I hadn't really. Well, I mean, that's just a fascinating.
It's a pretty quickly emerging field, and I recognize that it sounds a little bit wonky, but at the end of the day, it's about leadership, and the way in which we lead in solving public challenges is evolving from the old model. We used to look to charming politicians to get into office and pass bills, and those bills would theoretically have a direct connection. making no judgment on
how charming our politicians
are. You know, there's a sense that the direct line between electing someone to office and the results in society is not direct anymore. There's frustration with the traditional business model where profits come before anything else. And so you've got society and consumers now making choices based on more than just where they can get the best deal for their dollar. It's where can I get the best deal, and oh, is this also killing dolphins in the process, right?
Exactly.
And there's a sense in the nonprofit sector, with no disrespect to the folks who have held up that sector and built it over the past 25 years, there's a sense that things have to be done differently. With a greater eye towards creativity in the bottom line, because otherwise we're going to see tons of nonprofits that are critical to the community disappear.
Exactly, exactly. I know I was on the board of a nonprofit in Virginia, in Fairfax County, that dealt with at-risk children.
Yep.
And in the course of less than a year, all the government funding went away, and it was like, but the children are still at risk, and how do we do that? And it is slowly trying to find its way back, but and you just see that with so many different nonprofits. So this is definitely something they need to hook themselves into.
Well, and it can be taught.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's at Mason, so you must think it can be taught.
Yes.
But can it only be taught to young people who are still malleable? I mean, or can it really be taught to folks who are hardened capitalist business types who, you know, they've thought about business one way their entire life, and this concept of double or triple bottom lines is new. I mean,
I'll tell you,
how easy is that to really get people to rethink? It's a rethinking thing.
Those in your audience who have been around Northern Virginia for a while will remember the name Mario Marino, who was, you know, one of the architects of the Northern Virginia business revolution that led to the formation of institutions like Mason and its rapid growth. Mario's got a book out recently called Measuring to Outcomes. It's called Leap of Reason, Measuring to Outcomes in an Age of Austerity. And Mario was a traditional business guy for much of his professional life. But what he recognized a couple of years ago was that he was sitting on a lot of boards of both nonprofit organizations and advising municipal agencies, and concluded that we have to build a culture where it's not just the marketing that gets an organization ahead, but it's the ability to design it so that you have proof at the end of the day that you're making an impact. And the organizations that can prove that impact over time ought to be the ones that get foundation dollars, that get private investment, and that survive. So Mario's an example of someone who is, you know, I would say to Mario, if he sees this, young at heart. There's no question that there's a trend among college students now and over the past 5 years to really demand a different kind of leadership training, and that's what's driving this. But folks across the age and experience spectrum are participating.
Excellent. Well, we're going into our final segment with Greg Werkheiser, and we're going to come back. We're going to talk about some of the more specific programs being offered through the Center for Social Entrepreneurship. So stay with us.
I helped turn my child's public school into a whole new kind of school. One with a curriculum that really motivates kids. One that has extended hours, 6 days a week, year-round. With loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. One that has support services like medical and dental right there. A school where parents' involvement is encouraged. Where teachers have more time to teach. And students are excited about learning. There's just one problem. My child doesn't ever want to come home. You can help turn your school into a community school for excellence. Find out how. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
It's coming. Right to your neighborhood. And when it does, you may be surprised. It's your Social Security statement of your benefits, and it's going to help you plan your financial future. Your benefit statement will tell you how much Social Security you're eligible to receive and when you'll get it. Then you'll know how much you need to save for retirement, because that's coming too. The future is in your hands. Choose to save.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/meth.
Welcome to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. This is our final segment with Greg Werkheiser, the director of the Mason Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And we're going to talk some more. Greg tells me that anybody of any age can become a social entrepreneur. This is something people can learn about. So we're going to talk about some of the other programs, and then I'm going to find out how could I, as someone who's working full-time and doing all those other things, sort of dabble in this. Can I be a dabbler? Sort of like, you know, a Facebook lurker. Can I dabble in this? So first let's talk about some programs, because you've got something called Startup Mason, which I saw described as a business planning incubator as opposed to just a business incubator, which is what I'm used to seeing. So what is Startup Mason?
Startup Mason is open to folks both on and off campus. And for the off-campus folks who are watching, you could have had a career in government, in private industry, or in the nonprofit sector, or a hybrid, and you'd be welcome to come to this. It's basically a peer-to-peer business planning group. So it meets weekly during the semester, and it puts students who are just launching their first enterprise on the same plane as experienced entrepreneurs who have launched 10. But everyone is required to have a new business idea. Everyone gets treated as equals, and they basically exchange advice on how to get their idea from their head onto paper and out, tested in the community.
Wow. Okay. So that's why you have the planning part of this. So it's idea to plan, and it's sort of it's kind of like a mentoring thing is what it sounds like.
I'll give you an example. Right?
Okay.
We have a student whose name is Frank, and Frank decided that he wanted to make a contribution by making women's handbags. And it's a product he calls bindle bags. And the labor force for producing those handbags is drawn from the local homeless population. So he works with local shelters. Those folks get paid through the profits of the sale of the bags. And so they get a living wage, they get some work history, and at the same time, Frank gets access to a grateful workforce that's loyal to the product. He put it up, he came to us when it was at the early stage. He had just put together his first prototype, and through Startup Mason, we surrounded him with folks who have experience at each part of the process. How do you write the business plan? How do you test out this idea to a limited market without having to raise $10 million? And then how do you move it out and scale it up? And so Frank's out on the web, and he's an example of the 30 or so folks a semester who come in and try and move their ideas in a collective way from point A to point B.
Now, is this part of, there was something I saw about community building, capacity building. What is all that piece? Is that all part of this collective mentoring thing, or is that something totally different?
That harkens back to the exchange that we were talking about earlier, where you look out into the community, you find an organization that you think has the right leadership, they've got the right idea, but they just don't have the bandwidth to take it to the next level. They've proven that they can solve X, Y, and Z problem, but they're interested in expanding that and expanding that impact. In which case, that's our job to help, if they want it, to help find the collection of advisors that can help them move to the next level. And it takes the form of these projects. So a business plan, a social media analysis, an evaluation of individual programs to try and see if you can prove that they were successful, because what funders like to see is a record of success.
Right.
So that's the capacity building piece. And then the other thing I'd mention, which is another program that folks who aren't at Mason but are in the Mason community could participate in, is we've just launched this thing called Venture Camp. It's Wednesday, some Wednesday nights, every consecutive Wednesday during the summer, and now we're replicating it in the fall.
Okay.
And we'll tackle individual topics. So, like the question you were asking before, can I be what's the social entrepreneur lifestyle? Or what's the entrepreneur's lifestyle? Do I have to work 80 hours a week?
Right.
Can I actually have a life while I'm dabbling in this? So we had a panel of folks who have been around the block who said, here are the sacrifices that are required to be an entrepreneur, and here are the rewards, and other topics like that. So folks from the community can show up, they can ask questions, they can participate, and they can kind of start down their own path to figuring out how they're gonna be impactful on the world and make a living.
And make a living, because you know, as we say, I still got to pay my mortgage, so I can want to be socially impactful all I want, but you know, I could find myself being in your Frank person's workforce shortly if I didn't manage to get my own mortgage paid. And how does somebody find out about this venture camp? Is it sitting on your website someplace?
You can go to our website, which is masoninnovation.org. So M-A-S-O-N innovation.org with the www if you want at the front of it. And all of the programs that we've talked about, and half a dozen others that we haven't had the chance to talk about, are up there. And I would just encourage folks, if you have any interest in this, email us and we'll figure out if there's a connection that we can make.
That sounds excellent. I'll have to look at that, because Wednesdays are actually good nights for that. Most people meet Tuesdays, Thursday kind of thing. Wednesdays tend to be
We found that the audience has been very responsive. The initial series was held at Founders Hall, the new Mason campus in Arlington. And hundreds of folks are showing up. There's a real, and they really represent a cross spectrum of what you'd expect from Northern Virginia. Highly educated, diverse in every measure, but really interested in finding meaning in the work that they do.
Now, I didn't realize you had something down in Arlington. Where is it in Arlington?
So Mason's campus is, I guess it's not far from, if you just go down towards the city from the Boston Metro, in between Boston and kind of Clarendon.
Oh, is that where the law school is?
Yes.
Okay,
so,
I knew where that is.
Yep, the School of Law is out there, the School of Public Policy, and they've built a wonderful new event space that looks very Star Trek-y.
Oh, really?
Yes, you feel smarter just entering the building.
Just being there?
Yeah.
Do I have to wear something with black and red with a little silver? Yeah. Okay, I can do that.
Can you?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Well, that's a great location, because I have to tell you, and everyone who knows me knows how I feel about your regular campus in Fairfax, which is I get lost every time I go there. So there's a subway, and you can I can take the subway there, get out, walk a few blocks, and I'll be there.
Yes.
So that's
very easy to access. We draw a lot of folks from DC and Maryland as well. And you know, the Fairfax campus at Mason is wonderful, and that's where the majority of the students are, and it's grown so rapidly over the years.
Amazing.
So I think they built 60 plus new buildings in just the past 15 or so years. We've got a new president, Angel.
You do?
Yeah, Angel Cabrera, who, you know, we really lucked out because he gets this concept. He comes from one of the top management schools in the world. He was with Thunderbird. Yeah. So he's joined us now, and he's getting his getting off his sea legs, and is going to be a real great addition to the university, and one who can speak to the tradition of Mason being an innovative place that's willing to experiment with crazy new ideas like this.
Well, I think that's absolutely great. And I do remember when I first came down to Virginia, which was to go to law school at Georgetown. And George Mason was just this little commuter campus. And now, all these years later, it's like massive. And it's got a great reputation. So it's a good place for you to be. Now, what do? You also talk about doing research through the center. I mean, what kind of research are you doing? Is this just related to, does an idea work, or is it more as we think of the typical university research, big project things? What's the center involved in research?
Well, we're interested in looking at whether or not this new form of leadership has legs. Okay. When we think about the way in which millennials in particular, the folks to whom you and I are going to be handing off the reins of leadership sooner rather than later, you know, what is it that they need to be able to be successful in a much more complex world where the rules of the game are very different and slightly vaguer than they were a couple of years ago, and where technology is playing such an amazingly influential and in many ways a positive impact on their ability to reach out and solve the world's problems on a global basis. So we're concerned about, are we training them the right way? Are we onto something by way of preparing them to be what we call triple threats? So they're equal, you know, it used to be you could sing, dance, and do something else.
Right.
Was a triple threat.
So what is your triple threat?
Our triple
for
threat
your
is
students?
You can send these folks into government, into private business, or to the nonprofit sector, and they will be equally competent. That is, they will get the problem solved, and they won't be concerned about the traditional rules and barriers that govern who can do what.
Wow, that's a different way of thinking, because I know from long involvement with nonprofits as a volunteer and on various and sundry boards that there was always sort of this theory that if you were a nonprofit kind of person, you were just too touchy-feely. You couldn't survive in a real business environment. So training people to function on all three levels would be really quite the coup.
You know, and folks have prejudices from each of the sectors against the other sectors. You know, we hear plenty about government being inefficient, but you and I know that there are certain things at scale that only government can do. The government spends more to facilitate education in this country in a day than the Gates Foundation spends in an entire year. So we're not getting away from the reliance on government as much as we all like to complain about it.
Right.
You know, folks talk about the private sector not having values. Well, increasingly, of course, there's always going to be examples, bad examples. But we have companies now that really are finding their integrity and are viewing themselves as citizens of the world. And then, you know, folks used to think of the nonprofit sector exactly as you said. It's where you go if you want to live in mom's basement, survive on ramen noodles, and satisfy your soul.
Exactly right.
But I'll tell you, some of the folks that I've met who are going into the traditional social sector are some of the most sophisticated, savvy, impactful folks that you're going to meet. And that's, I think, what we find in this generation that's coming up is they don't accept the rules of the game the way that they were, because those rules have kept us from solving some of the biggest challenges that we face in society. So let's rewrite the rules, which is largely what they're doing.
Well, I have an issue for you.
Yes.
You can take this back. And
Great.
Being as you are in Northern Virginia, you know what my issue is going to be.
No.
If you all could figure out how to solve the traffic, that would be an amazing contribution to society. So I just put that out there for you, that would be one of those issues that we've been trying, it fits in, we've been trying to solve it forever, nobody has.
I think I've heard something about it over the years.
Yes, you have.
We'll come back in a year and it'll be taken care of.
Well, good, I'll hold you to that. Thanks for coming, Greg.
Thank you, Bettina.
We are signing off. I am going to become a camper, so stay with us. I'll report back.